When someone died in the ancient world, there was no funeral home, no embalming chemicals, no refrigerated morgue to slow things down while the family figured out what to do next. Death was immediate, physical, and impossible to ignore, and the ways ancient humans actually dealt with it were far darker and far stranger than most people realize. Let's start with the most basic problem death created. A body left untouched attracts predators, spreads disease, and decomposes fast, especially in warm climates. Ancient people didn't have the luxury of slowly processing grief before dealing with this. Survival demanded action almost immediately. In many early human groups, the very first response to death wasn't a ceremony. It was disposal, but even that word undersells what was actually happening. Archaeological evidence shows that some of the earliest deliberate burials date back over 100,000 years, which tells us something important. Even in a world defined by brutal survival, humans still felt compelled to do something with their dead that went beyond simply walking away. But not every group buried their dead the way we might expect. Some of the practices uncovered by archaeologists are deeply unsettling by modern standards. One of the darkest and most debated practices is excarnation, the deliberate exposure of a body to the elements and to scavenging animals, allowing the flesh to be stripped away naturally before the bones were collected and dealt with separately. In some ancient cultures, bodies were placed on raised wooden platforms, specifically so that birds, particularly vultures, could pick the body clean. This wasn't neglect, it was often a structured, intentional part of the death process, based on the belief that the body needed to be separated from the spirit before it could move on. Evidence of this practice has been found across multiple ancient cultures, from parts of the Middle East to certain regions of Central Asia, and it continued in some form for thousands of years. To modern eyes, it looks brutal. To the people practicing it, it was often considered a respectful and even sacred way to return a body to nature. Then there's an even darker chapter, one that historians and anthropologists still debate the exact scale and meaning of. Evidence of ritual cannibalism. Archaeological sites in various parts of the ancient world have uncovered human bones showing cut marks consistent with the same butchering techniques used on animal remains. This doesn't automatically mean starvation-driven cannibalism, the kind we've talked about in survival contexts before. In several documented cases, researchers believe this practice was ritualistic, a way of honoring the dead by literally taking them into the bodies of the living, ensuring the deceased's strength, knowledge, or spirit remained within the community rather than being lost forever. This idea might sound shocking today, but for some ancient groups, leaving a body to simply decompose in the ground was considered a waste, or even disrespectful. Consuming a small portion of a loved one's remains in specific ritual contexts was instead seen as an act of devotion, not horror. Skull modification is another practice that feels deeply unsettling by modern standards, but was widespread in the ancient world. In multiple cultures across different continents, the skulls of the dead, sometimes ancestors, sometimes respected leaders, were deliberately removed, cleaned, and kept. Some were painted or decorated. Some were used in ceremonies meant to keep the presence of the deceased active within the community. Archaeologists have found skulls that were clearly handled, displayed, and even passed down across generations, treated less like remains and more like sacred objects tied directly to family identity and memory. In some cases, this went even further. There is evidence from certain ancient sites of skull removal happening very soon after death, sometimes within days, suggesting it wasn't simply about honoring someone long after burial, but about immediately transforming the body into something the living community could keep close and interact with. Human sacrifice is perhaps the darkest and most infamous practice associated with ancient death rituals. And unlike some of the others on this list, it's extremely well documented across multiple ancient civilizations. In several ancient societies, when a powerful or high-status individual died, it was believed that they would need servants, guards, or companions in the afterlife. Archaeological excavations of certain royal tombs have uncovered the remains of multiple individuals buried alongside a single primary body, in some cases showing clear evidence that these additional individuals did not die of natural causes. This wasn't universal, and it certainly wasn't practiced by every ancient culture. But where it did occur, it reveals something deeply important about how some ancient societies viewed death. It wasn't seen as an ending. It was viewed as a transition to another form of existence, one important enough that an entire household, or even dozens of people, might be sent along to accompany a single, powerful individual into whatever came next. Grave robbing might not sound as dark as some of the practices already mentioned, but the way ancient societies dealt with it often was. Because many cultures buried their dead with valuable items, tools, jewelry, weapons, sometimes even food meant to sustain them in the afterlife. Grave robbing became a real and constant threat almost everywhere burial practices existed. In response, some ancient burial sites were deliberately built with traps, false chambers, or hidden entrances, specifically designed to protect and sometimes punish anyone who dared disturb the dead. Discovering a body inside a collapsed trap chamber, clearly a robber caught by the very defenses meant to stop them, is not an uncommon find at certain ancient burial sites. Mummification, most famously associated with ancient Egypt, involved a process most people today would find deeply disturbing if they saw it performed rather than just read about it. The internal organs were removed and preserved separately. The brain, in many cases, was extracted through the nose using a hook tool and discarded entirely, because it wasn't considered important for the afterlife. The body was then dried out completely, using natural salts, over the course of many days, before finally being wrapped. This wasn't a quick or simple process. It could take well over a month from start to finish, and it required specialists who handled death as their entire profession, working directly with bodies as a normal part of daily life, in a way that would feel completely alien to most people today. What ties all of these practices together, as dark and unsettling as many of them are, is that none of them came from cruelty. They came from an attempt to answer one of the hardest questions humans have ever faced. What do we do when someone we depended on, loved, or respected simply stops existing in the way we understood them to exist? Ancient humans didn't have modern science to explain death biologically. They didn't have grief counselors or established religious institutions with thousands of years of established doctrine already worked out for them. Every single one of these practices, however brutal they look to us now, was an early human attempt to make sense of the unknown, to maintain some form of connection to the dead, and to protect both the community and the deceased as they understood the process of death itself. In a strange way, these dark, uncomfortable practices reveal something deeply human. Long before written history, before organized religion, before any of the death customs we recognize today, ancient people were already grappling with loss, meaning, and what happens after we're gone. The methods were often brutal by modern standards, but the underlying instinct behind almost every single one of them was the same instinct we still carry today. The refusal to simply let someone disappear without meaning, without ritual, and without being remembered.